he had a really tough childhood because he had constant pain. And in fact, he wasn't able to study in school because he was always in pain. And so they took him to a country doctor. The doctor said, "You have bladder stones." And I do know a doctor who can, try and take care of that. Remember, this was 30 years before the discovery of general anesthesia. I won't get too deeply into this, but let me just say this. They had to bend him over on his knees. They strapped him to a board and they sliced his perineum open, and then they dug in to his bladder,
Crap.
cut it open, removed the stones, and then sewed it back up, sewed his perineal area back up.
Oh
And he
my
was
God.
11. So there's rumors that
Oh,
perhaps they gave him brandy. But go.
welcome, everyone, to another episode of WTF History. This is where we get into the most amazing facts from history. I am your co presenter, Mike Gatto, and I'm here with my lovely and talented co host, David Quintana.
And I am ready. Yeah, this is one that I've been waiting to do for a while. I fancy myself a historian. I've learned more from YouTube on history than I ever learned in my years in college in history. Like I have a bachelor's in history. I learned so much more on YouTube than I ever did in the University of California. Anyway, I have been dying to talk about this because I consider my history journey AP and BP. Before Polk and after Polk, because I never really appreciated the achievements of one president as much as I did when I discovered James K. Polk.
I'm
Where
saying I'm going to jump in, and people have heard of James K. Polk. I certainly have heard of him. And in previous episodes, which we're going to link to, you have heard of some things that happened tangentially during his administration. But let's be very clear as we go out. He's not on a coin. He's not on a bill. He's not on Mount Rushmore.
Yeah, I mean, let me be straight. I think everything west of the Colorado should just be one big state called Polkville.
Oakland.
Polkland, yeah, I really do. So James K. Polk is a president that I don't think anyone outside of a very select few appreciate what he accomplished. But once people do, you wouldn't believe how many little cults there are to James K. Polk, and I consider myself a member of them. So James K. Polk was born in a log cabin in Pineville, North Carolina. He was born in 1795, so we'd only been a country for about 25 years. No, 19 years. Sorry about that. Our country couldn't even drink yet. He had a really tough childhood because he had constant pain. And in fact, he wasn't able to study in school because he was always in pain. And so they took him to a country doctor. The doctor said, "You have bladder stones." And I do know a doctor who can, try and take care of that. Remember, this was 30 years before the discovery of general anesthesia. I won't get too deeply into this, but let me just say this. They had to bend him over on his knees. They strapped him to a board and they sliced his perineum open, and then they dug in to his bladder,
Crap.
cut it open, removed the stones, and then sewed it back up, sewed his perineal area back up.
Oh
And he
my
was
God.
11. So there's rumors that
Oh,
perhaps they gave him brandy, but he took that shit cold, man. That operation did a couple of things. One, it kind of removed this constant pain that he was in, right? He couldn't even study because he was always in pain. It removed it, and he was able actually then to become quite an accomplished academic. The other thing it did is there's rumors that we think it made him sterile, and it also led to a lot of medical complications throughout his life. We still think he was in pain, nothing near the pain he was in as a child, constant pain that he was in. But he became a very dour person, right? He didn't have a lot of friends. He wasn't like the kind of politician that goes out in glad hands. He was a kind of politician that was driven by policy. He just wanted to achieve policy. He believed he was the best person at it. And if it came to having to ask people for their vote to do that, that's what he would do. He was that politician. I think you know that type of politician, Mike.
for sure.
Yeah. Not the kiss a baby, but the please believe in me, I'm going to get this done. He was that guy. He became a lawyer. He was elected to the state legislature in 1823. So what was he, like 28? Again, one of those guys, born in a log
Yeah.
cabin, had his bladder ripped out.
Yeah, by the way, I just for the record, I am still reeling from the having your perineum sliced without
Yes,
anesthesia.
without
Oh,
anesthesia, dude. We're not talking about having his arm sliced, right? or his thigh. Talking about his
Right.
perineal area. Then he was elected to Congress, served 7 terms in Congress. He was elected to Congress in 1825. He became a protege of Andrew Jackson, who was from the area. And Andrew Jackson kind of took him under his wing and helped him along in his political career. And so Andrew Jackson, he became an acolyte of Andrew Jackson. Andrew Jackson's nickname was Old Hickory. His became Young Hickory. That's what his nickname was. Then in 1835, he became Speaker. He became Speaker of the House. Then in 1839, he was elected the governor of Tennessee. He ran for the governor. He ran for the governorship in Tennessee, and he won. And he was served 1 term, but then he lost his next election, and his next election after that, he lost 2 elections in a row to a good old Tennessee politician by the name of James Lean Jimmy Jones. That has got to be one of the best freaking political names.
As a Southern politician, you are bored if that's your name.
James Lean Jimmy Jones. And the other thing is, like, everybody was pretty lean back then anyway, right? Everybody was pretty thin. So how thin did you have to be known as Lean
I know
Jimmy?
you see these movies from World War II before seed oils and before the inflammation diet and diabetes and chemicals and stuff like that. And the guys, even during World War II, were like, they had like, 26-inch waists and stuff like that. And yeah,
Right. So Lean Jimmy
right
must have been
day.
damn lean.
Yeah.
Okay. So he lost 2 elections to James Lean Jimmy Jones. So Polk, former Speaker of the House, right, former state legislator, he's now sitting out there, former governor. He's in Tennessee. He's kind of like, trying to figure out his stuff. And the election of 1844 happens, right? So he's been out of office for, he ran in 41 and lost because the governorship was every 2 years. So he's been out for about 3 years, but he's just an afterthought. So coming into the National Democrat Convention for the election of 1844, people thought it was going to be Martin Van Buren, right? On their side. The big fight was between the Democrat Republicans and the Whigs. And one of the big issues at that time was the annexation of Texas. And that was a huge issue, the annexation of Texas. Like, that was a big issue. No, it wasn't a big issue. It was the big issue, annexation of Texas. And the reason wasn't because of Texas. The reason was because of slavery. They had slavery in the territory of Texas, in the country of Texas. Sorry, it was a country. And so if you brought in Texas, if you annexed Texas, then that means they would come in as a slavery state. And that means that the Southern Democrats, right, they wanted that because they wanted another state that
Yes.
believed in
It's
slavery.
much like the occasional debate about DC statehood. Democrats
Right.
know that DC votes reliably Democratic and would tip the balance of the Senate and the House and so on.
And so that was the big issue. And Martin Van Buren, he knew that his party, the Democrat Republicans, because they were really based in the South, he knew that they wanted him to be pro Texas annexation, but he couldn't do it because he was from New York and he would have lost all of his New York base. And was he Old Kinderhook?
He's Old Kinderhook.
Old Kinderhook. So Old Kinderhook, like, he had to be calculating and he had to oppose the annexation of Texas so he didn't lose his Democrat base up north in New York. But then he figured, well, who else will they go with? They got to go with me, right? Because I'm Martin Van Buren. And they didn't. They had 8 ballots at the Democrat convention in 1844. Polk didn't attend, but his name had been tossed out as a potential vice presidential nominee. Not like a headline name, but just, blah, 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 Smith, Jones, maybe Polk. It was one of those deals, right? He, James K. Polk, was all about annexation. He was all about manifest destiny. He was all about annexation. That's what he was about. And, he wore it proudly. And because he was a Jacksonian. And so, he had no problem with that. So after the 8th ballot, they realize that they can't win, right? And Polk's not even there. And they're like, shit, we can't win. What are we going to do? We need someone who's going to support annexation, but you can't win it. I can't win it because you got to get 2/3. So they finally decided, what about Polk? He was Speaker of the House. He was a governor. He's for annexation. Like, he's not doing anything. He lost to Lean Jimmy twice. So why don't we call Polk?
That's amazing.
Of course, you couldn't call Polk, right? You had to gallop, from wherever it was held, Baltimore. I don't know. So they threw Polk's name out there as a compromise candidate, and he won. He became the
What?
Democrat the nominee to the convention, and or to for the presidency. He became the nominee, and it just happened like that. They had to actually write out to Tennessee to tell him, "Hey, guess what? You're our nominee
And
for
you're running for
president."
the president. And by the way, this
Right?
underscores what I often say. There's a lot of luck in politics, folks. I mean, look, I've won 8 elections. There's a lot of luck in politics. I mean, what a fortuitous set of circumstances. You're now the Democratic nominee for president of the United States.
Yeah. Right. There you
And
go.
he
Boom.
wins. And I mean,
He
we're
wins.
not jumping ahead. Obviously, it's President Polk we're talking about. He wins, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. We've already sold that one.
Yeah.
So he's back in Tennessee. He's massaging his bladder, and they write up and they tell him, you're the Democrat nominee. And Polk's like, yeah, all right, cool. And he runs against perennial loser. I say that with all respect because he was a great statesman, right? Henry Clay. And I kind of stepped on the lead there because he
Sorry.
lost. But it was a hell of a close election. James K. Polk ended up taking votes away from Henry Clay up in New York. And the reason was because there was a third candidate who got 2.3%. James K. Polk won by 1.4% of the vote. It was the closest election in history at that time, but we're not done. No, that would be enough for any other freaking president, right? You get your bladder cut open, you lose the lean Jimmy, you're elected presidential nominee, you're not even there, you're back in the backwoods of Tennessee. But that's not enough. Polk accepts it, and Polk said, "Look, I swear I will only serve one term. And I only have 4 goals. I have 4 goals, and I will accomplish them in one term, and I will step down."
Essentially, what we would call now 5 campaign promises. I'm going to serve one term and I'm going to accomplish these 4 things. What were the
Yeah,
4 things?
the 4 things. Yeah, the 4 things were after the War of 1812, the Oregon Territory, it was more than Oregon. It was like Oregon, Idaho, Washington. It
Sure.
was all, that area. That area was all disputed with Great Britain because Great Britain was still up there in Canada. And that
49.
whole area, the 40,
Yeah.
yeah, but what became the 49th parallel because
Yeah.
of James K. Polk. We should call that the Polk parallel. So that was still up in the air, the whole Oregon Territory dispute. He said, I will solve the Oregon Territory dispute and I will bring Oregon into the United States. I will bring California into the United States. I will get rid of high tariffs and I will create an independent treasury. That was it. Those were 4 promises. 4 promises. The banks were involved in the treasury, right? So him saying, I'm going to create an independent treasury wasn't an easy deal because you had all the rich bankers, right? All the big fat cat banks, all the gilded bankers out there. Not like they were late in the 1890s, but they were still big, right? And they were like, no, we like handling all this money. So it wasn't easy. And then the high tariffs, you had all of the businesses along the East Coast who were like, no, we kind of like those high tariffs. We like the protective tariffs. We like our goods. Annexing Texas wasn't one of his promises because that was baked in, right? That was already baked into the platform. Everyone knew that they had to do that. And then the big one, though, was, and I'm just going to serve one term. What did James K. Polk do? Polk went out there and took care of freaking business. So one of the campaign slogans was 54-40 or fight, and that was the 54th parallel. That meant that the United States at that time, they wanted the United States to go all the way up to the 54th parallel, and that meant like a third of the way up to Canada. And that's what they harped on all the time, 54-40 or fight with the British. Polk said to the British, what if we go to 49? Like, 54, I get it. These guys, they're a little crazy. I get it. They want a lot of shit. They can't get everything they want. Why don't we just go 49 and call it a day? No one fires a bullet. No one shoots a shot. And now you get your Canada, we get our stuff. And the Brits said, okay. So he was able to bring the Oregon Territory into the United States without firing a single shot. No
Amazing.
bullets. He just said, why don't we take half a cake? The 49th parallel is the current parallel that divides the United States and Canada. He solved the tariff problem. He lowered the tariffs. It actually created a booming economy because it allowed for a lot more to go back and forth, right? Materials to go back and forth. One of the things that helped him, though, were that the Democrats had swept Congress, too. So he had a House and a Senate that he could work with. So he took care of the tariffs. He took care of Oregon. And then, this is the touchy one. He kind of started a war with Mexico. So it might be one of the lamest reasons to start a war. We don't need to go into that now. And in that war, actually, the halls of Montezuma, because Zachary Taylor went all the way down to Mexico
That's
City,
right.
captured Mexico City, and that's where we get the halls of Montezuma from the Marine Corps hymn. Because of this war that we had with Mexico at that time, he was able to create the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, which we've talked about in a previous episode. And as part of that, we got pretty much all of the West Coast. We got California, New Mexico, Arizona, Colorado,
So he
all of
set
that.
a second border, and he's midway through his first term,
Yeah,
right? The
yeah.
second modern border in the United States.
But
Their first Canadian border, now he set the Mexican border.
he set the southern border, the western border,
Uh,
because the Pacific Ocean, he got everything to the Pacific Ocean, and the northern border were all created by James frickin' K. Polk.
uh,
Then, of course, Texas was annexed. Texas came in. But you're saying, hold it a second, what happened to the slavery question? And that was a sticky wicket for James K. Polk and for Congress. And they're like, we can't do the Texas thing because they're going to come in as a slave state, blah, blah, blah. James K. Polk did inherit slaves, but he wasn't driven by slavery. He wasn't driven by the slavery question. He was always driven by expansion. And so he said, look, I want to expand. I want to bring Texas in. Slave, not slave, I don't really care. But I do have to take care of my party. So he said, look, here's my idea. We're going to bring in Oregon, the Oregon Territory. Oregon will come in as a non slave state. Texas can come in as a slave state. Moot.
preserving the balance for 10
Preserve the
years at
balance.
least.
Preserve the balance. So now he has set the southern border, the western border, and the northern border of the United States as we know them today. We're in his first term. So, I mean, this guy was amazing. He brought in Nevada, Utah, California, Texas, Oregon, Washington, and Idaho. Those were the full states he brought into the Union. And then partial, most of Arizona, most of New Mexico, and parts of Wyoming, Colorado, and Montana. Essentially, like I said, everything west of the Rockies should be Polkville because he brought all of that in. Now
And
there are going
he
to be
made
some.
the United States a continental power, right? I mean,
He did.
before it was a coast power, and now it's a.
He brought us out to manifest destiny. Now, some of the people, some people say, well, that created some tensions that later, kind of came to fruition in the Civil War, and you know what I mean, the slave versus free states, and that's true. But we would have had, I feel, we would have had a lot more tension if we did not have a secure western and southern border. We probably would have been fighting over things there too.
But I was going to say, what's amazing is, David grew up in Texas and moved to California, and I grew up in California. I mean, you could argue neither of us would be American citizens if it wasn't for this guy. I mean,
Right.
the vast number of people who live in this Western United States. I mean, it's amazing.
Yeah, and people say, oh, he was an imperialist. Well, everybody was imperialist at that time. The United States was only 50 years old. They were, of
Yeah.
course, going to try to expand. They wanted the minerals. They wanted you know what I mean? They wanted the agricultural land. It's just what a young country does. And for us to act like that is not a driving force for a young country and the leader of a young country, it's what every single
Well, it's what
country
we always talk about.
does.
Right? It's presentism. It's a different species of presentism. It's taking modern values and applying them to the past. What people forget is that imperialism did not really become a bad word until 1946. It was just accepted as something that countries did, right? Well,
It's
you
just
want
what,
more territory.
yes,
I
that's
mean,
right.
every country wanted more territory. But it was really with the advent of the United Nations and post World War II where we started to say imperialism is not really a good value for modern humanity.
Yep, that's right. That's right. No, you said it all. Agreed. Until recent history, no one ever frowned upon that. In fact, if you look at school books, it is what we championed. If you look at school books from the 1950s and the 40s and the 30s, it's like what we
You said
championed.
we
And
talk about manifest destiny. Yeah.
yeah, it was all about that. And securing the southern, northern, and western borders, I think James K. Polk provided us a very, very secure, I hate to use that word twice, but it provided us a very safe future as a young country moving into the future. If we want to talk about him as a person, we could do that at another time. That's not how I look at my historical figures. I look at the who, what, and how, not like who they were as a person. I can have that conversation, but that's not this conversation. I want to talk about a president who achieved more in one term. By the way, he founded the Smithsonian Institute. He opened the Naval Academy, and he issued the first postage stamp. The guy was nonstop, man. Not
And this
that
is all
bad.
in 4 years, folks. Wow.
Yeah. And then his term ended, and he said, I'm done. I did everything I said I would do. I don't need another term. That's just
Wow.
like unheard of today with
They
politicians.
don't make politicians like that.
No, they really don't. And so he then left and he died within 100 days in Tennessee. He had caught cholera. Remember I said how he was always kind of sick for the rest of his life? Also, I've read that he had diarrhea a lot that plagued him throughout his life, and a lot of people think that that was a precursor. He died of cholera, and a lot of people think that he might have had like a low. He might have had some sort of like background choleric disease his whole life that came to fruition
Something
after he
was
left.
happening in the other regions, folks. That's why he
Yeah,
had no kids. Yeah.
yeah, right. And so he went home
Jesus.
and he died 3 months later. The shortest retirement of any president in history. The superlatives for this dude, you just can't think, they're just you run out of them, man. What this guy did in his life, he died in his 50s, and it was a it was a it was a life well served, I think. I think he provided the United States with what we needed as we move forward with an independent treasury, secure borders, a lot of land for us to move and maneuver into, and I
His
again,
epitaph to be James K. Polk, he made us a modern nation, right? And what an amazing story. I mean, thank you for sharing this. Again, we started this by saying this guy's not on a coin or a bill, and he's not on Mount Rushmore, but wow, what an effect he had on the modern United States.
yeah, he really did, and he had the greatest mullet in the history of the presidency.
Yes, he
No,
did.
nobody rocked a mullet like James K. Polk. Anyway, that's my story. I'm a huge fan of his, and I hope I have educated some other folks and they can look up more about his presidency.
You absolutely did, David. And if you like what you hear, don't forget to like and subscribe. We'll be back with another episode next week.
Hey, if you like what you hear, like and subscribe. It really means a lot, and we would love to have you coming back every week. Thank you.